The one I wanted to ask was talk about the difference between networking and building relationships, especially when it comes to something like this.
That's the unfortunate thing is that so many people lose a job and they've never built a network. And I don't see a network. A network is not a take, take, take. It's a give, give, give. Now I work with a lot of people who either are unhappy in their jobs or in transition. And I always tell them things don't happen to you, they happen for you. Because anytime I've had something that traumatic happen in my life where I make a huge mistake, that's always been the reason for the word transformation in my book. It was my biggest transformation, and we don't know why that happens.
It's not what happens to you, but happens for you.
Right.
I think that's so powerful for everybody because a lot of the folks you probably talk to and I talk to are in transition, often for a reason. Sometimes they left of their own free will, but oftentimes they're let go for some reason. Either the company went out of business or they decided to move on or they got fired, right? So those are all things that may sound bad or horrible in that moment, but oftentimes it's the best thing that could happen to you or for you.
I think we come to this world with a purpose, and we're all here for a purpose. And one of my favorite scriptures is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. So I think we all have a purpose. We all have unique gifts, skills, and talents. And my definition of purpose for career and life is that we use those gifts, skills, and talents that we have been given to serve others and to make an impact.
Welcome to Unlocking Yours. Well, we want to cover those key pivotal moments and decision points in an entrepreneur and leader's career that really change the trajectory of their life or their career. And I want to hear your stories, Patti, because I think we learn the most from stories. But I don't want to hear just your glory stories. I want to hear your gory stories.
Oh, I have plenty of those.
Because as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. My guest today is one of the most sought after executive coaches in all of Central Texas. And she provides lots of help from career guidance to encouragement to helping people find their purpose. And we're going to have an incredible conversation today. So if you're in transition or if you're simply interested in what God's got and planned for you and you want some encouragement or some inspiration, you're going to want to listen to today's pod. But Patti, before we get going with any of that, you probably know that I like to hit my guests up with an off-the-wall question or comment to really keep them on their toes, keep my audience on their toes. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
All right, we're going to talk a lot about purpose on today's pod. And I know many executives and successful entrepreneurs are often romanticized about what their purpose is. But my question is finding purpose sometimes code for just burned out?
Well, I think that purpose, this is just my belief about purpose. I think we all have a calling. I'm a person of faith, so I think we come to this world with a purpose, and we're all here for a purpose. And one of my favorite scriptures is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. So I think we all have a purpose. We all have unique gifts, skills, and talents. And my definition of purpose for career and life is that we use those gifts, skills, and talents that we have been given to serve others and to make an impact wherever we're called to serve, whether it be in government, whether it be in a church, whether it be in business. I happen to be always in the marketplace, and that's where I've been called to serve. So it's about making an impact. Now, let's go back to you say burnout. When we talk about me working with unemployed people, what people don't know is that most people don't know who I'm working with because they're some of the top leaders in some of Central Tech, well, all over the world. It's corporations where they may be burnt out. They've been doing the same thing, or just see that the shoe's going to get ready to drop.
Yep.
What I also see is that I work with a lot of people who, when they started their careers, they were there to scale a company, and now it's moved to turn around a company, and they don't like that. They like to grow companies.
Well, we're going to get into all that for sure. And so, as you can tell, my guest today is Patti Boyle. She is essentially the executive whisperer when it comes to helping people find their purpose. And she's been doing that for the last 27 years, I believe, at Pure Potential Consulting. And prior to that, she was an entrepreneur. She launched out of Houston a training and development company that grew to 33 offices, ultimately sold to Adecco, which became part of Lee Hecht Harrison, and she was an executive there for a bit. Patti Boyle, welcome to
Thank
Unlocking
you.
Moves.
I'm just so honored to be here, Kurt.
Man, I'm excited to finally have you. So, those of you who don't know, we worked a lot with Patty over the last, I guess, 10 or so years. A lot of executives and entrepreneurs in transition or people really trying to find themselves in the workplace. And Patty is called to that. And she's got such a servant heart, as you're going to find. She's also the author of several books, including one of her most recent ones is called Thrive with Purpose, which we're going to dive into today. But Patty, if you don't mind, let's start with your story because I definitely want to get to the people in transition or people trying to find their calling or purpose. But let's find a little bit about your background. As I mentioned, you've got a pretty decorated background yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about your story? And the title of the show is Unlocking Moves, so we're going to get into
Unlocking
that as
moves, and
well.
you want okay.
Don't tell me you're unlocking move. Don't spoil it, but you can tell me your story.
I guess I am really fortunate that I found my purpose very early in life. But I think for me, my greatest traumas were my greatest transformations, but they didn't feel like at that time. So I started my career. I taught AP calculus, physics, was in administration in high schools. And I was the trailing spouse, meaning that I followed someone around. We moved every 2, 3 years. And when we moved to Houston, I took a job in a high school, not teaching AP calculus and physics, but when I got to the place, I thought I was being hired to teach advanced math. I ended up teaching remedial math. And I was warned
I think I would have been in your class, by the way. Not really.
I was warned. The reason they put me in there is because I was over all girls discipline in the private high school I was at in Louisiana. So to make a long story short, I was hired in a remedial class where they'd had 13 substitutes and none of them could make it in the class. The kids came to school, they didn't know their multiplication tables. They were supposed to be in ninth grade. They didn't come with their books. They didn't come. They sat there, they slept. And I was like, I just believed in all their potential and I thought I could make them learn. They didn't wanna learn. And so I was there 8 weeks because we had moved in March, and in May, it was final exam week, and in those days, you wouldn't have had a PowerPoint, you were at the board. That's how old I
With
am.
chalk.
And all of a sudden, I felt something on my back, and there was a kid with a gun at
Oh,
my back. And I don't remember all of it. I mean, I just, I believe a higher power took over for me, and I turned around and told the kids to all get under their desks. One of them flew out, went and got security, and somehow I managed to talk him down and say, "Hand me the gun, hand me the gun." And it was just like I had never had a job because I loved my jobs. And so by way of being a trailing spouse, my husband was with an oil company and I had career coaching. And so school got out and I made the decision to go get that perk, the career coach.
oh, wait, you're moving on to the next part of the story. Can we come back to this for just a
Yeah,
second? Because I think it's the first time we've had a gun pulled on us and unlocking moves. That had to be such a terrifying feeling. This
it
was
was.
before all the, I guess, the shoot ups that are now almost commonplace,
It
which is
wasn't it was
ridiculous.
before you had that you screened kids going into school every day.
Right.
It wasn't really common. Unfortunately, the young man, he was a sweet kid, but he just had no home life. He'd been in trouble with the law for killing animals in the neighborhood. He had a really sad life.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry to hear that for him, and I'm glad you're here, and
I'm
that
glad I'm here too,
and you made it. And
and I'm glad all my students were safe.
it sounds like really your faith might have had part of even that discussion
Right.
to ask him to hand the gun over and not panic.
Right, and to see the best in him.
Yeah. Well, I knew you had pure potential, had as a reason for the name. Today's episode is brought to you by Chinook Seedery, the best sunflower seeds ever. Available online at ChinookSeedery.com and Amazon or wherever you get your seeds, including Buc-ee's, Dick's Sporting Goods, Shields, Love's Travel Stop, Circle K, and thousands of other locations around the country. So tell me what happened next. So you said you had a career coach that you talked to, and that's maybe part of the.
So I had a career coach, and that was probably the best thing that ever happened. And that's where now I work with a lot of people who either are unhappy in their jobs or in transition. And I always tell them things don't happen to you, they happen for you. Because anytime I've had something that traumatic happen in my life where I make a huge mistake, that's always been the reason for the word transformation in my book. It was my biggest transformation, and we don't know why that happens. So the career coach worked with me and worked with my skills in that. And
I'm sorry to interrupt one more time, but coming back to it's not what happens to you, but happens for you. I
right.
think that's so powerful for everybody because a lot of the folks you probably talk to and I talk to are in transition, often for a reason. Sometimes they left of their own free will, but oftentimes they're let go for some reason. Either the company went out of business, or they decided to move on, or they got fired. Right. So those are all things that may sound bad or horrible in that moment, but oftentimes it's the best thing that could happen to you or for you. So I appreciate you bringing that to bear.
So that was just a real turning point in my life. And the coach did an assessment on me. He realized I was really positive and optimistic and probably naive. Like most people who get a gun pulled won't say, "Oh, I saw the best in that child." And so he said to me, "There is a job at the University of Houston for the associate director of the Center for Applied Technology. And with your math and science background, I think you ought to go apply." And I look at the like this is now what I work with. I look at the job description and I'm like, but it says PhDs only need apply. And he said, "Yeah, you don't need a PhD. You've got your master's degree." He said, "I'm going to introduce you to the president of the university." Okay, so I'm young and dumb and oh, okay, I'd love to meet him. I'm a good networker, as you know.
Right.
So I go meet the president, and he really liked me and he liked my energy, and he introduced me to the dean, and the dean hired me. It was just such a wonderful job. I was over corporate training, and it's just so good because of this experience 20 years ago. It's when Michael Dell and Steve Jobs had a vision for the world that everybody would have a computer in their hand. Now, the thing about those times is that we didn't have 24/7 news and social media, but it was like people like finance people were just like in fear, like that we were training, like, "Oh, we're going to lose our jobs. Computers are going to take our
Kind of
jobs."
like today with AI, right?
Exactly. And that's what I feel like it's like deja vu for me. And there was just so much fear. And I'm not going to lie, computers, they were coming off mainframes, manual processes, and they had to learn the computer. And there were secretaries who took shorthand, and there were some who just retired and some who learned how to use the computer. And I'm speaking in at a conference in May, and my title is AI won't take your job, but someone with AI will. And it was the same thing then. And so I got to see the people who resisted the change, and I got to see the people who jumped on the bandwagon.
Well, wow. There's three things in what you've described that I want to make sure the audience hears. Number one is you didn't have a PhD. It didn't stop you from applying. And my point in that is sometimes we read what is stated in the job description and we take it for gospel.
Right.
Oftentimes, those job descriptions are either suggestions or they're just amalgamated from a bunch of different sources, and it really might not even mean that much at the end of the day. So don't let that stop you. The other thing is that it's a lot about who you know and those
Right.
connections. Obviously, your coach had a connection to the president of the university. That's a great thing. Not everybody has a connection to the president, but most of us have some way to third degree find a
Mhm.
connection to folks. And the last thing I think might be the most relevant to today's day with AI and technology, we already mentioned it, and that is you don't have to be fearful of AI, but you do know how to use, leverage, and take advantage of AI if you want to have a strong career.
Well, in my book, there is about dangers and opportunities of any change. And so with AI right now, in November, MIT came out with a study and they said that AI could actually take over 12% of tasks, but it hasn't. It's only taken over 2%.
Mhm.
Now, if you listen to constant negative news, you think it took everybody's job. It's only taken over 2%, and 97% of businesses aren't showing an improvement in productivity. So, which I train my clients to do is think about it like if you're in finance, if you're in HR, if you're a CEO, which I work a lot with CEOs and CFOs, it's like go get that AI and you be the leader who figures out how to produce the improvements. So right now I have a well-known CHRO in the Austin area. She's in an AR course all this week. I have a finance guy from Google who was over $50 billion portfolio. He's getting an AI. chief AI leadership that he's been working for a year. These are the people that are not only going to get a job, they're going to double their salaries
Yeah.
because they're going to improve. What they have to be looking at is not what they did, but what do they have to do to make their companies productive?
And that's a great way to take what could be seen as a challenge or a threat and make it into an opportunity and a strength.
Right.
Wow, I love that. Let me ask you, because I know you work with a lot of executives, many of them whom have lost their job, as I mentioned. And so my question is, so many executives, they underestimate what their identity and their title mean to them. So my question is maybe not quite a trick question, but when someone leaves a senior role, what actually gets lost first? Their income, their identity, or their community?
All of the above. Okay. Kurt, it's just like it is just the most difficult thing because they've had such high titles in their companies and they're all top performers. They're all A players. They did not get to be CEOs, CFOs, CHROs, and their identity is tied to their job title. So until we can work through that and have them realize all of the gifts, skills, talents, and they're typically, not always 45 or older. So the ones that still have kids in high school and college, they want another 5, 10 years in the workforce.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but many of them, most of them don't have to work for money, but because they do have to work for purpose. They do have to work for meaning, and they lose their community until they can unweb from that identity that I am a COO or I am a CEO or I am a CFO. And it doesn't matter. Like early in my career at U of H, when at University of Houston, before I started my business, what I was doing is I was handling all those major layoffs for the Chevrons and the Exxons and the Procter and Gambles and American General. And I'd go in there and 3,000 people would be laid off on one day.
Mhm.
I mean, I'd handle those layoffs, it would be 15,000.
Wow.
And I don't care what level they were. I mean, I'd be in a hard hat down in Leesville, Louisiana, as the helicopter would fly in and they'd lay off roustabouts, right?
Wow.
It is just they lose their salary, they lose their
Pride.
community, they lose their pride, and then the sense of uncertainty. When we're not certain, and most people live from paycheck to paycheck. And so it's severe, and it doesn't just affect them. Some of it affects their whole family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the spouses deal with it worse than the executives.
Yeah. And now let's talk about some examples of when it's flipped. So somebody comes in very woe is me and feel like they've been kicked, which is true. And you've got great examples of how they've been able to turn it around, not necessarily with the same CFO identity, but with maybe something else that God's calling them to do. Tell me a couple of stories about that.
Okay, well, my book is full of them.
Okay. Let's
And
talk about the book is again, it's called Thrive with Purpose. And you can get it on Amazon
right.
and elsewhere.
Amazon, Ingram Sparks,
Okay.
yes. And so I realized this when I was writing this book. I run an executive and transition team every Monday morning called Next, and they're all my clients. And so if they really were successful that year, they're in my book. So some of the ones you introduced to me. So this started during COVID when I started rewriting my first book. And he was Naval Academy graduate. Procter and Gamble started his career, ended up over a CEO of a construction company in Florida. And when COVID hit, what his company did was they refurbished Marriott's and cruise ships. Well, you can imagine when the COVID lockdown hit, what happened to his business. 85, 90% was gone in like a couple hours.
Yeah.
And so what he did is he started working with me, and he was really into EOS, which is the entrepreneurial operating system, which many companies, and he had initiated it. So he did something really unique. He built a strategic plan so the company could go forward, turned it back to the founder, but he went and hired the highest producer of EOS nationwide and asked if he could study under him. And now he has an EOS business, and it goes back to his roots in the military. The entrepreneurs he works with are entrepreneurial business owners. Another one that comes to mind, chief risk officer of a major credit union here. Again, COVID, he loses his job, and he and his wife get in the car and start traveling all over the country. And they have aging parent. They were from Virginia, but they hadn't lived there in years. Aging parent, aging moms, 2 daughters that are growing, no grandkids yet, but they will. And the wife says, "Why don't we just move here?" So immediately, everybody I work with, they think of what did I do? So he starts looking for CFO, chief risk officer jobs in banks and credit unions in Virginia. And he finds the market's too small for him to make the money. And so what he does is through assessment, I see that he has all of the business functions, operations, finance, strategy people. And he had been an executive out of Silicon Labs earlier in his career. So they sell their house, move to Virginia near the daughters. Wife was really happy. And he now has 2 Vistage groups as well as a thriving consulting, and he wanted to be sailing part of the time, he has no time to sail. And I can go on and on and on. And some of them, just I have another one, a CFO.
Well, let's pause it for because I want to capture a couple of those things. Those sound like folks who had a lot of meaning and like pride, built up in the
Yeah,
career that they had built. And what they saw was they used this as really as an opportunity to reinvent themselves.
right.
And that's what I encourage a lot of folks in transition is to use this as an opportunity to reinvent yourselves.
There's a story in here, and this was early in my career, and I was with one of the oil companies. And with the oil companies, the companies would pay, but they get a lot of money from the federal government to retrain.
Hmm.
And there is still a lot of money out there for retraining. If companies are impacted, you can go to the Workforce Commission in your state, and there's untapped financial resources to retrain. Well, she was a petroleum engineer, probably early 30s. And I do her assessment and I say to her, "Ann, like, what is this? You don't look like an engineer. You don't like doing engineering. You look like an artist." "I know. I wanted to be a fashion designer." I'm like, "Well, why weren't you a fashion designer?" "Because my dad's the president of oil company XYZ.
Right.
And he wanted me to be an engineer and said I could not make money as a fashion designer. So she took the money. Had a big severance, for her age from the oil company. She went to FIT in New York, and about 6 years later, she was making more money than she was as an engineer.
Thank you for sharing that example. I want to come back to so she's further in her career, but when she started her career, she sounds like she knew it was a mistake. And I want to touch on that now. That's a lot of pressure. Your dad's the oil, the president, and he's pressuring you. And so I get that. There's certain examples. However, I work a lot and see a lot. I have a lot of friends with college graduate kids now. So I'm starting to get those as you do as well. Connections. Can you meet with my 22-year-old,
I know I meet
whatever.
with everybody's kids.
Exactly. I do the same thing. And one of the things that I encourage them to do is, first of all, maybe you don't know what you want to do yet, but most people in the world don't know what they want to do yet. I tell them I'm 57 years old. I still don't know what I want to do. And so don't feel pressure of that. And second of all, just because you get pulled in one direction by a parent or a friend's parent or a friend or whatever, make sure that's right for you. And I encourage them to reach out to dozens of people in related industries and talk to people who have that job. And
Right.
if you have an engineering degree, I just had this conversation with my son. You're going to get an engineering degree. He's a freshman. Go talk to people who have engineering consulting practices. Talk to people that work for the state highway department, or again, dozens of tangential industries. Talk to them about their day. You
Right.
might talk to them and say, "Oh my gosh, this sounds boring as dirt, and I don't want to do it." Save yourself the time, right?
Well, and I researched, put a lot of research into this book, and it was kind of astounding to me. And I'm like an example of that. Like I tell you, like I'm a math and physics. I taught math and physics. Well, why did I do that? Because my dad, I was supposed to be Patrick Michael, Kathy was supposed to be Michael Edward, Mary Jean was supposed to be Michael Edward. And by the time 12 years later we had my sister Terry, he just gave up. But my dad was the head of STEM. And so we're all math and physics, and one of my sisters an engineer. We've all been executives in business. And, only 27% of people ever really use their degrees.
Mm.
And your point is so good. If you want to do something, you need to go be with the people who are doing, like if you want to start a business, you got to get around that. If you want to write a book, you've got to be around that.
Mhm.
If you want to change from engineering to fashion, I sent her to talk to fashion people.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm a accountant by trade
Right.
in school and a CPA, and I'm not a very good CPA. So, and that's partially because my dad was an accountant, and
Right.
I Felt like accounting was the best degree to get.
Well, and I'll say this, some of the most unhappy people and mismatched people with their careers are doctors and lawyers. I have a story in there about that.
Yeah.
And it's because either their parents were or the social expectation
Mhm.
that this is where you can make money.
Yep. That's my least favorite question at Westlake is where are you going to school? It's just so much pressure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about you've got a few stories where you had an executive that left for whatever reason, and then they maybe transitioned, and now they're in a great spot. There's a messy middle there that I would love a few thoughts around. And as I started before, I don't want to hear just your glory stories. I want to hear your gory stories because the bigger the shit show. There's a big shit show in the middle there for folks who are really struggling with identity, really struggling with what do I tell my spouse, really struggling with who am I? Talk about that a little bit. I know that's gonna dive into maybe some of the purpose discussion.
Well, that's me handling being over layoffs that there'd be 2,000, 15,000, and you'd see everything, and I would just highly encourage my coaches to get them in as soon as they could to start working with them, and you'd be stunned. Like, I always tell companies, "Don't lay off on Friday," and we would talk to them, and they had not gone home and told their spouses or families they'd lost jobs. I mean, and that just, they really do need to get the support. It's just they are just so stunned. I also tell companies, don't stun them. If you can, let them go into redeployment, have a few weeks to process this. Don't just show up one day and lock them out of the building, and I've seen that happen,
Yeah.
and change the code and take away their texts, and they're standing there, and they're so shocked. And so, it's the uncertainty of it. And my book is tied to my website, www.purepotentialconsulting.com. Again, www.purepotentialconsulting.com. And the subtitle is Actionable Strategies, Proven Tools, and Free Resources. And I loaded up in fact, this podcast will go on my website. I loaded up with free resources. And one of the things I have on there is a life change assessment. And the reason I have that is because if they get a score over 300, they have an 80% likelihood of getting sick. I mean, they really have to work to protect themselves.
Mm.
And we work with them. I mean, I work with them too, to be exercising. I work on with their mindset to exercise. It's not uncommon when we just can't face the pain, we start numbing ourselves with alcohol or drugs.
Mm.
And the more they can take care of themselves, but they really need to look because some of them get laid off, and probably a quarter of them, they get divorced over it. And if they don't have the support of the spouse and they have some, many are very fortunate, but others aren't. I mean, I had one in Silicon Valley last year. His son, 17 years old, woke up and had an aneurysm and lost his eyesight 3 days after he lost his job
Mm.
as a senior VP in one of the top companies in Silicon Valley. And so they have multiple things going on, and the uncertainty is just really, really hard on them.
Yeah, and I don't wanna take that lightly. I'm as people who've seen many episodes of this pod, we talk a lot about mental health on here, and you never know what someone's going through, whether it might be a lost job or a marital challenge or a child challenge or whatever, and so, let's just, use this as an opportunity to remind people that everybody's going through something and be a good human.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing about life. We can't get through it without trials and
Right,
tribulations, right?
right. Exactly. So, well, one of the things I wanted to cover was some of the things that you should not do when you're in transition. You obviously covered a few there. You need to get exercise, so don't become sedentary. You need to continue to interact with other humans and not resort to drugs or alcohol. You need to get sleep. I mean, so
Right.
any other advice like that that we need to be considering?
Well, those are you need to, and I throw in there spiritually, emotionally, and physically. You need to really work on yourself and take care of yourself because you are in transition. And job search is right up there with the death of a loved one and a divorce and that life change thing. You can take that free on my website,
Yeah.
and you'll see. But if you've had multiple, but then there's the job search things that you have to do.
Yeah.
So what happens first is like, let's just say 2,500 people were laid off in a company, and I wasn't per se. I was working with these. I was managing the career coaches. They all ran in. I want a resume, and it's like, okay, but they don't need a resume, and that's how outplacement really started. I mean, like I was doing technical training at the University of Houston when an oil company came to me and said, we're laying off 1,000 people and they're the top talent and they really just need a resume and to learn how to interview. And I
Right.
thought, I'm young and dumb. I'm like, oh, sure. And then we saw they'd been 20, 30 years with the company, their whole identity.
Yeah.
So what we start working with is one, dealing with the emotional part of it, but the sooner they can let go of what they've done and really start having a vision. And it's a pretty simple, but it's not logical if you've never looked for a job. It's like, who am I? Who's going to hire me? And who's going to pay me?
I think that's worth just doubling down on because a lot of people look for a job, they look to redo their resume and their LinkedIn. But what you're describing is who are you? What should you be doing? What is God calling you to do? And use it as an opportunity to reinvent yourself.
Well, you'll know if this book goes chapter by chapter and we don't get to the resume. I think it's 11 or 12. And now with LinkedIn, I'm just like, if somebody has like, and don't misunderstand me, you do need highly, particularly the executives, they need an executive looking resume, but what they really need is a plan forward. And I call it a project marketing plan. And it's like a business. You wouldn't start a business without having a business plan with a marketing plan.
Right.
And so that's where we start working with making sure we stabilize them and then that they're doing the right things emotionally, physically, spiritually. But then that biggest thing is a marketing plan. And I fuss it like recruiters. I fussed it like 1 year's like, don't ask them for the resume, ask them for the marketing plan. Like, what are they wanting to do? Not what do they do?
Right.
And, many times when they started with the company, it's like they like to scale companies and now they're laying off people and that's why they left, right? So the marketing plan tells who they are, tells what is my unique market differentiator. So let's just say I'm an FP&A finance person. Well, what makes me different? What is my unique marketing edge? You need to know what is your brand? What makes you different than everybody else who's looking for an FP&A job, right? And so that marketing plan, we really look at that. Then I'm like, research, like, what would be 30, 50 dream jobs? What companies do you want to work for?
So don't just look for people with open roles on the web. Look for companies that are doing something that you'd like to do.
Well, there's a graph in my book, and over 70% of jobs are found through the hidden job market, meaning people are hired by referrals. Somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And I call it in my book, the ABCs of networking. All of us know 250 people. What events do you need to start going to where people that are in the area you want to be to get you to people who can hire you? And I would say, given that over the last year since I've moved back to Austin, that I work specifically with executives in transition, I'll tell you 99% of them have got jobs through people they worked with for contacts, vendors,
Yep.
their next door neighbor, their kid's soccer coach.
I'm glad you said that last part because a lot of folks are sitting here listening and saying, I don't know that many people. And the reality is, you know, people that know people that might know people. And so, as you said, your soccer coach, your vendors,
Your
your,
dentist,
your
your banker.
exactly. And it takes maybe a personality of like, no one's going to advocate more for yourself than yourself, probably. And a personality to ask for some
Well,
of
and with
referrals.
LinkedIn now, LinkedIn is now such a game changer for the good and for the bad. For the good, because you can really go on there and find the 250 people you know, and then who they know and who they know. And AI net right now it prints your whole list. Now, where is AI a detriment? Because it's just heartbreaking to me. I'll get introduced to somebody like I was introduced to a global director of a major company here and he had corporate outplacement with one of the former companies I was an executive years ago. And he had for 9 months sat on LinkedIn just answering jobs, answering jobs, answering jobs. And the problem with that, there's a book, and I reference it in my book, Design Your Life. It's two Stanford professors. And it's one chapter I like in the book. They go through like why most of those jobs on LinkedIn aren't real. Well, because companies have a candidate internally and they have to benchmark, or they get government funding, so they have to post,
Yeah.
or they're just like, and I've had one already, one of my clients last week, she got scammed. all this time into it, and it was like it didn't take me long because I went online and I'm like, "You're getting these emails from India."
Oh, geez. Well, yeah, be careful with that too. I think it's so again, the power of connection.
Right, but LinkedIn is good for connecting you. I mean, it's just incredible between LinkedIn and you put Copilot with that, and you can find, like, all of the people you know that you forgot about that you went to college with. The
Yeah. I have a love-hate with LinkedIn myself. So a few years ago, I had a very small and concentrated pool of folks that I truly knew so that if Patty reached out to me and said, "Hey, how do you know so and so?" I could say, "Well, I went to school with them or worked with them or whatever." And then I wrote a book, and I basically had to friend everybody. So
Right,
if
I
you
did too.
unless you're, almost everybody I'm gonna link in with you on LinkedIn, let's put it that way.
Well, somebody said to me yesterday, "Oh, he knows 189 people that I know," that one of my clients, and I
Right.
go, "He has 48,000 contacts." I would think he may.
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's talk about the power of what I'm gonna call the strategic pause, the short sabbatical, the take your time. I think a lot of folks wanna rush because they feel that sense of pride or ego or pressure from the spouse or from themselves. They don't take the time to really be deliberate. And again, think about where maybe God's calling them or where they wanna go, and then being strategic about the pursuit as opposed to whatever the fastest job they can get. Tell me a little bit about your perspective on the pause.
Well, the pause depends on people's safety net. Most of the people I work with probably should take a pause, but their personalities are so driven, they can't take a pause, right? Or they're just getting out because they're driving the spouse crazy, but they should. So let's talk about them. But then there are people, and it's just heartbreaking. I do a lot of volunteer work in job clubs. And we come across so many people that they're like, how people have no nest egg, and so they if they don't have a job within a certain amount of time, the minute if their companies don't give them a good, like 2, 3 months severance, they're not gonna be able to pay their mortgage or house notes. So that's a whole different story,
Yeah.
and you don't have time, and, sometimes I say just take a bridge job, get something,
Some
get the money.
consulting, perhaps?
Yeah, consulting, bridge job, whatever you have to do to bring money in. Now, the other piece of it is people like most people I work, not all of them, but probably 90% of them, they never have to work a day in their life for money, which is a blessing, but they do have to work for fulfillment. And my dad was an example of that. My dad retired at age 62 because he could make more money. He was a teacher and he'd coached phenomenal athletes in the Montana. He's in the Montana Athletic Hall of Fame, and he retired at 62. And he retired in June, was actually driving my mom crazy. And it wasn't enough for him. He was going up and working out and then going and meeting his brother for donuts every morning. And my mom was like having a fit. So he came down in February. She had not retired, and he came to Louisiana in February. And I was bringing him back to the airport, and he dropped out of a heart attack. And in my car, bringing him back to the airport with my 4-year-old son, who's now an adult. And, I always at some point thought that might be why I was called to this. If dad had a purpose, if somebody would have worked with dad, I mean, even if he was out doing volunteer work or working down the golf course or, and so that was just really one of the traumas that I say was a transformation. I walked out of the hospital carrying a shoebox with his glasses and his wallet and thinking, wow, none of it goes with us and we never know it's our last day. And so, sometimes people always say, well, maybe that's why you got into to the business because it was short. It was like a year or two later that I, actually was brave enough to go, interview with the president of a university, young and dumb, right? That I didn't have the credentials for the job to get the job. But I always thought, like, if he would have just had something to do besides drive my mom crazy and go have donuts with his brother every day, because he was always so busy. And what I also remember about his funeral was because he had, like, every young man in our small town, Butte, Montana, he had influenced him. You could not get in the church, you could not get down our street. And that's where, he had maybe completed his purpose because he had
Mhm.
impacted a lot of people.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing. That had to have been a tragic moment. I know it was many years ago, but
Well, for probably 10 years, I wouldn't have told the story without crying.
Well,
It was so
I
traumatic.
know it's emotional for you now, and
Yeah.
so thank you for sharing. And I'm sorry that must have been tragic. And it sounds like a good man, and you're carrying some of his mission forward. It sounds like
Right.
because that's the ripple effect we have for our connections, our young men that we're or our children, of
Right.
course.
And, there are like a major oil company, their executives, their chairman, their vice chairman, presidents all have to retire at age 65. Well, they would hire me in 18 months before to assess them, to start helping, and they'd get them an office and they never had to work again. And they'd get Price Waterhouse to do their finances. And by the time, well, first thing I always planned was, so they wouldn't drive the wife crazy. And they were all men. I'd have them have the wife and I've worked with the wives too, have a big trip planned,
Mm.
that they'd go on a Mediterranean cruise or something, and that's the pause. But then they could do consulting, and they could be on, like, one of them was the chair of the board of hospice. So by the time they left, you just can't go from one day managing
Mm,
49,000 people and being the vice chairman of an oil company
yeah,
to the next day doing nothing.
exactly. Well, hey, we're running short on time, so I've got a couple of other key
Okay.
questions I have to ask. One is the pivotal question. I'd love to hear about your unlocking move. Again, that's a key pivotal moment or decision point that really changed the trajectory of your career. We sure we've covered a little bit. Tell me more.
Well, I have another pivotal moment.
Yeah, let's go.
I'll be honest with people, I'm 70, and, I wrote my first book at 65, and
Wow.
writing a book is not for the faint of heart. I think it's like anybody who has had a successful career, they have a story in them, and they ought to write a book, but it's not for the faint of heart for business people to write a book, I can tell you, and Kurt, you know that. So 80% have a book in them, 15% have a manuscript, and then only 1% ever finish them. So I have published 3 books, and I think I finally learned how to do it. So there has been this book that I have been resisting for 30 years, and it was on my company's success of having all the offices be an entrepreneur a year, first woman small business person of the year in the state of Texas, and people always said, "You need to write a book on women leadership and empowerment." And I said, "I don't know how I do that. I've been educated with all men. My clients are all men. I work with all men, but my volunteer work, when I look back, any board I sit on is for the advancement of women and children." So my next book, hopefully, pray to God, will come out in 2026, and it will be Lead on Purpose, and it's more of my story, my 2 grandmothers, one from Ireland and one from Italy, and it's going to be a little bit of Scarlett O'Hara and a little bit of Joan of Arc, a story from 6th grade when the nun got mad because I wrote a story about the woman I admired with Scarlett O'Hara,
That's
and so then
awesome.
she made me write it, so it's a little bit of soul and a little bit of steel.
That's fantastic.
So that's what's next, and, that's what I have to say, because so many people, they retire and they should be out, like, doing something in the world because they've got a lot of talents and a lot of skills, and sitting in a crochet club isn't, like, what I think people should be. I mean, maybe it is good for them, but everybody has too many talents not to be being of service till they can't anymore.
I love that. Absolutely. So I've got another question I like to ask, and I call it the listener's advocate question.
Mhm.
So if I see Kurt here having a one-on-one conversation with Patty, what would I want Kurt to ask? I've got several directions I could go. Some are your top 3 tips or something, but the one I wanted to ask was talk about the difference between networking and building relationships. Especially when it comes to something like this.
That's the unfortunate thing is that so many people lose a job and they've never built a network. And I don't see a network. A network is not a take, take, take. It's a give, give, give. And so that is the one thing about, losing a job or being unhappy in a job and having to look. But what I would say about networking is that it has to be relationship building. And you have to get out. And I tell, like, again, I've worked with all levels of people, but, more recently with executives, I tell them, "Get out and find out about people." Have a business you have a business conversation,
Mm,
and people wanna help. And, I mean, most people I know, I
yeah,
mean, you're gonna get a jerk once in a while.
yeah.
That's just life. But build relationships, and this is a real opportunity to do it when you have to be looking for what's next.
I think that's so true. So many people have ability to have a powerful network, but many people don't cultivate it until they need it. And I've got several examples of even friends of mine where I'd reach out to them many times when they were in a position of whether it's something I trying to sell them something or just trying to connect with them and have lunch where they never had time. But as soon as they needed a job, I was the first one to call because I've always been in professional services. And the other thing that I want to mention, and this is some advice my good friend David Washburn gave me many years ago, and it's been so powerful for my networking and connections, and that is make it a give, not a take, and always ask, "What can I do for you?"
Right.
Find a way to help them, whether it's with their job, whether it's with the role that they're in. Maybe it's helping them find a soccer team for their 8-year-old. Maybe it's trying to find a landscaper, anything, because that's how it just feels like a give and take as opposed to just a take.
Well, and the first part of meeting somebody that you don't know or you've been introduced to is there's a book, it's an old book, it's called The Likability Factor.
Mm.
And you have to connect. And so if I had never met you, I'd have walked in here and started talking to you about that picture, or walk in and you find out your kids played on the same team and
Mm.
or you went to the same college,
Yeah, find a connection point. I was at a lunch the other day, and the first time I met this person, and I felt like the least important person in the room.
How could that be, Chris?
I'm trying to have a conversation, and they're looking over their shoulder, looking at their clock. There's a meeting. It's just it didn't feel real, honestly. And so maybe that's another word of encouragement for folks is be present with the person that you're with. You can carve out that hour for that person. Anything after that can happen after that.
Right. And, I would give advice because, like you and I have an easy time where I run into you at every networking event, right? I mean, that on my strength finders is when others over. So it's really easy for me, but I work with people and it's not really easy
Mm,
for them.
yep.
And so if you have to hire a communication coach and learn how to connect and learn how to be present and, look at those limiting beliefs in your mindset of why you don't connect with other people.
Yeah. So, hey, I've got one more question.
Mhm.
It's a trick question. And that is tell me one question that you're never asked, and either you wish they would ask or you're secretly glad that they don't. I've got one teed up in case you struggle with it.
Well, no, I mean, people wanna know about my career, and they never wanna know what's my priority in life. And
Oh,
my priority, I mean, like, I have been so fortunate. I mean, it was such to have a business and to be on purpose for so long, but it was never, ever my first priority in life. My kids were always. I
mm,
mean, I would do the craziest things, like, I would get on planes in London and be in at my son's football game and not even I look at it, I don't even know because 'cause I've been on an all-night flight.
right.
I tried never to miss, and I can't tell you that it was perfect, but now I have a second chance, and it's my grandkids.
Mm, nice. Well, here's a question I was going to ask, and I think I already know the answer, but was you spend a lot of time with executives helping them figure out their purpose. When was the last time you questioned yours?
Probably when I decided that I was going to, change it's not a change, but I have been resisting that book, Lead on Purpose for Women Leaders. And it's really I designed an emerging leader program, and it's always been my volunteer for an organization here. It was a mentorship program, and there weren't enough women, so I took one of the emerging leaders, and one day she was in a board meeting, and she was standing up and not saying yes to things, and she's texting me like, I'm channeling my inner Patty. I'm the only woman on the board, but I'm not just saying yes to say yes." And I'm like, "You go, girl." And I've, resisted writing that for 30 years, and that's where I question that is my purpose, it's my legacy purpose to help women, young, emerging, aspiring leaders.
I love it. That's fantastic. I'm so excited to see that come about.
But don't get me wrong, I'm still gonna work with, like, my
With yeah.
executives and companies and organizations to change.
I appreciate that. So, hey, how can we find out more information about you or connect with you?
The best way to connect to me and to find the free resources is to go to www.purepotentialconsulting.com. Why the name of my company? Because I see pure potential in anyone I meet. Purepotentialconsulting.com. And my LinkedIn is attached to it. And the best way, I put my email, and if you really want to get a hold of me, text me because LinkedIn, I'm like you. I have, like, so many contacts, I
Right.
don't check it.
Well, let me give you a plug because when she talks about free resources, they are absolutely free resources. She's been running these
Yes.
networking groups. She does it for free for folks who are in transition. It's an amazing group, and she cultivates an amazing community. And all those resources she talked about are available for free on her website. So check that out. So Patti, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Thank you so much for joining me on Unlocking Moves. I'm going to ask everybody to go like and subscribe wherever you consume your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you go. Please give us a 5-star review, and we appreciate your follow and listen.
Thank you, Kurt.
Awesome, Patti. Appreciate you being here.
Appreciate it.
If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.